All right. Welcome everyone. Welcome back to another session of Consulting Growth Insights. And my name is Mike Grinberg. I'm the founder and principal of Proofpoint Marketing. And I've got David Rush here with me. David and I have known each other for a little while. David, you were a guest on one of our past podcasts as well. So welcome back, I guess. David's the founder and CEO of smallworld.ai and love the platform. I'm sure we'll talk about the platform at some point here in the context of this conversation. Um, but we're going to be talking about leveraging networks and relationships, David. So welcome back to the show,
Thanks,
first
Mike.
of all.
Great to be here.
And for anyone joining live, if you've got questions, pop them in, say hi in the chats. I want to know who's all here, and happy to take tangents and answer questions along the way too. So to set the stage, David, again, client base that I work with over at Proofpoint, it's mainly small, medium-sized professional services firms, consulting firms, etc. And a very common problem that I run into is, and especially I think it's important to talk about we're close to most companies are either finalizing their 2025 planning, or if they're late, they're kind of scrambling to finish it. But looking at 2025, I think we can all agree the market's tight. It's harder to sell. Um, there's a lot more choice out there in everything, which creates more risk, obviously, more pressure internally on every single investment out there, more scrutiny. So sales is harder. I think we can all agree on that. And I think it's maybe even doubly so in professional services because you're selling an intangible. There's no product that somebody can see. There's no demo that they can get. So with that, what I often see in these firms is as they grow and as they bring on new partners, and even if they're not partners, as they bring on like practice leads and other key leaders, um, the network kind of splinters. And while in the beginning, it's all kind of the founder or the founders, and it's their network and everything gets built off of that, as they bring on other key people and they grow and they scale, um, the network splinters, meaning, maybe you have a couple of different practice areas. Each one has a partner that's leading it, and each one of those partners has their own network. And the other groups don't know of the existence of this network, at least not entirely. I've even seen it where sometimes the other practice areas don't even realize what type of work is being done and which clients are present in the other practice areas. That happens in larger firms like, 20, 30 million plus usually, but still it happens, where you go, oh, I didn't realize we're working with so-and-so. Can I get an intro? Like, it's not even a conversation that happens, and then there's no process. Um, so, and the other thing, I'll stop kind of rambling on it, is there seems to be kind of mismatched maybe expectations and sort of the stigma of, well, how do I even ask for a referral from my executive, right? A lot of these firms, they'll hire, either formal, like, hey, we're going to get a business development sales team in place, or it'll be like these practice leads or whatnot that are also responsible for sales. But they're almost like afraid sometimes to ask the executive or the founder for a referral to somebody who they're trying to get into, and they just waste opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll kind of, there's not a question in here, but more of setting the stage. And I'd love to hear, your thoughts and experiences. Obviously, your client base is much broader than professional services, so it's interesting to kind of hear what you're seeing and around that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think in professional services, of course, your reputation, it's an intangible deliverable, right? So it's
Yeah.
one of these where reputation and referrals carry more weight than they might, with other businesses. And so those relationships become even more paramount than they might, in other businesses. It really boils back down to trust. And we've talked about this, right? Trust is what unlocks access, and access is what gives you an opportunity to have that conversation, to create that connection, but it ultimately can really change the outcome of a deal. And so I think it's really underutilized. To your point, you might have partners or even mid-level people who have previously worked with somebody who's risen into the ranks. It's just really important to discover these relationships that are abundant throughout every company. There's direct relationships, there's third degree relationships, there's relationships based on location, right? I mean, if you're in a St. Louis or a Columbus or a Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's a good chance how to get to somebody that's from
Yeah.
there. And so having the ability to discover those relationships becomes a massive lever for these business development teams. And again, I mean, we're in 2024 and it's still this really underutilized opportunity, I think, in relationship to being hesitant to ask an executive, for sure. And that's where, if there are ways to remove that ambiguity and make it sort of more accepted, more comfortable through a common language across a business, that hesitation sometimes goes away.
100%. I mean, I can speak to personally. I mean, there have been so many introductions I've made in kind of relating to the couple of things you mentioned, like location. So I'm in Phoenix, Scottsdale area now. I've only been here for a couple of years. A large part of my network is in Minneapolis, and a large part of that happens to be in like the agency and like health tech and healthcare space. A lot of the people I know now don't realize that. So I'll be talking like just last week, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a founder of a consulting firm, and we're just chatting, and he just mentions, "Oh yeah, one of my focuses is health tech." I'm like, "Hey, you don't know this, but I happen to know a bunch of health tech founders back in Minneapolis." I was like, "Oh, really? I did not know that." Right. So it's again, that's obviously a one-off type thing, but
Yeah.
that happen. I've seen that happen internally too,
Oh yeah.
where you have internal teams don't realize somebody else's location-based background. They don't realize that you're originally from New York. I didn't know that, or
That's right.
whatever it is,
That's right.
right?
And the vertical focus. I mean, to your point,
In the vertical focus, exactly,
we have a
exactly.
customer who had an executive recently join, and his experience was purely in financial services, and he had been a CISO at a few different places, and his network within that world was obviously very, very strong, and attaching him to the AEs that handle that vertical is a no brainer opportunity.
Yep, yep. And the saying kind of goes, your network is your net worth. But it's interesting that once you kind of once the firm scales or the company scales, it's not really treated that way. It's treated kind of again in these silos. So let's talk about like what does it take to break down those silos? What are the things that firms need to be doing to break down those silos and bring the existing networks and relationships to the forefront?
Yeah. I think it all starts at the top. I think when you've got executive sponsorship and a culture that believes in the value of this and they've seen results from it, it sort of, trickles down to everyone. And then there's a process. And for some, that process could be a Google sheet. For some, that could be, a weekly meeting. There's, tools like ours that help operationalize all of that, right? So I think like it starts with executive sponsorship, and then it often requires a way to operationalize it so that the communication, the tracking, all of that can sort of be systematized. And I think incentives play in a unique role, right? So you have the executives and board members and advisors and those that are intrinsically motivated either through their stake in the business or just their responsibilities. They don't need something tangible. What they need is visibility. They like to know outcomes. They want to make it easier than it is through the process that they have today. But as you start to, go beyond that, and you do enlist employees or customers or partners, there's some really clever ways to incentivize them with a more, tangible reward. I mean, we're seeing more companies who have, typically rewarded employees for, referrals that lead to new hires, right? Those are
Hmm.
expensive. When you're paying a recruiter to hire somebody, those referral fees have been around a long time, but they haven't thought about it for new business. And as more and more companies look at the customer acquisition costs and expense of fielding a big BDR team, they're taking a step back and saying, okay, whether it's AI agents or whether it's just we call it relationship activation. How about we incentivize those people throughout the entire company in a similar way to enlist their help getting warm introductions into those target accounts when they have relationships that matter. And it's, totally legitimate. It totally makes sense. It actually becomes a really interesting conversation for HR teams because it's a new incentive on top of their base comp and
Mhm.
bonus, right? This is a chance for those employees to actually earn more. So it becomes a retention opportunity if you get everybody participating, and especially when you give them the opportunity to opt in or opt out. It shouldn't be mandatory. Someone's network is their those are their relationships, right? They own that trust, and different people, want to treat that network differently, and you've got to be careful with it, or you won't keep that social capital. So anyway, that's think about rolling it out to a larger group. I think the right incentives matter
Mhm.
for the right teams.
Yeah, I think that you brought up social capital. I think it's a really important point to maybe pause on for a minute. I think it's a part that I think um, a lot of people miss and don't think about enough. Where it's the general focus for a lot of professional services firms. Where do we get referrals from? We get them from clients. But what oftentimes is missed is the value exchange is complete. You've done the work, they paid you for the work. That's it. Anything else is extra. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ask them, but what it means is that that social capital that they have to use to make that referral, forget the fact that they have to do extra work and they've already paid you for it, like, that part's done. But now it's kind of it's extra, right? So, that's where I think m maximizing these other parts of the network, whether it be employees, executives, board members. And interesting, again, I think at early stages, a lot of those happen, but then again, as the firm grows, those seem to kind of fall, to the wayside to a certain extent, or kind of take a back seat. When in reality, those people have some of the most valuable networks out there, and you can keep using them. Not necessarily the same people,
Mhm.
but um, and it's you know. Uh, partners you mentioned, things like that. And it's how do you cultivate the right relationships with the right parties and then track that network to know when's the right time to ask and things like that.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think, if you put yourself in a connector's shoes, it's really about a request that's relevant and timely. Because if you're going to ask someone, right, to take a meeting or share something with them, if you have that understanding that it can help them solve a problem that matters to them, and it's something that they would actually find value in learning more about, then the willingness to help is so much greater. So focusing on the context of the request and making sure that it's really relevant is a big part of the equation.
Why do you think teams don't do this more often? Because that's the part that always seems wild. And I've got my thoughts about it. I kind of mentioned the stigma
Yeah.
part, but like, why do you think, like, especially if there's like a formal business development team, let's just say within an organization,
Yeah.
why don't they do that more?
It's interesting. I think a lot of salespeople tend to look at it as though it's their job to get into these
Yeah.
companies, right? They've been hired to go figure it out. And it's kinda like playing, pool, and you've got this shot where you could use the bridge, and you decide that you're gonna lean over and, try to hit a really hard shot, but
Yep.
if you just use the bridge and hold it up, you can actually, make a shot a lot easier. Um, and I think that they don't know that they've got permission, right? So if you're gonna just try to do this on a LinkedIn, or you're gonna do it through a random email, you don't know if that connector has actually said, "Okay, I'm willing to make this introduction for you." Frankly, you don't know if one of their connections is a real relationship or not. And so I think, there's this chance you're taking that could be perceived as presumptuous because, I'm using LinkedIn for a different purpose than waiting for your warm introduction request.
Mhm.
And I think that that creates hesitation. And so it's not that reps won't use it. They'll typically use it as an executive sponsor of a deal. And so
Yep.
it's mid funnel deals, right? It's deals over a certain deal size that have checked so many boxes, and then it's like, okay, who do we now need on our deal team? And again, relationships matter a lot there, right? Let's be
Yep.
clear. Building your deal team, identifying those people that should be on that team to start with is a really important use case for this. But when it comes to new opportunity creation, I think you look at it as their job, and there's just a faster, easier path. Again, as long as it's a relevant request, as long as it's done really professionally, if there's, um, a collective understanding of kind of the deposit and the withdrawal, then it's there for everybody to use.
Yeah, it's actually, again, another point that's worth pausing for a minute on is you mentioned the deal team, and the this is another place where I think this does not get used nearly enough because of the same reasons you mentioned, which is, you have a BD person that's, again, it's like they feel it's their job. So there's a stigma of, well, I can't ask for help. I think there's also the other side of it. I've seen executives that go, well, I brought you in here for a reason. If all you're doing is asking me for introductions, like, why do I need you kind of thing? And I think that's the wrong mentality to have. We can maybe put that to the side for a second. But where I've also seen it is where the business development person might have their like they have their own network and maybe they came through an acquisition or something like that, but their network maybe they're a level down from the executive leadership, let's just say. So they make their connect and maybe they connected with the champion. But how powerful would it be to then go to the executive or the board member and go, "Hey, I've got so and so. They're all about us. Inevitably they're going to have to sell this internally to the CEO or whatever, the
Yeah.
CFO or whoever. It looks like you have a connection there. Could you introduce me?"
Well, and I think that, more times than not, that's what the executive prefers and expects too, right? They're
Yeah.
willing to help, but they don't want to, do the cold calling or the opportunity
Yep.
creation, without, a reason behind it. And so that's a use case we see quite often as the one you just described.
Yep. Yep. And then, you know, uh, the other thing related to that is where um, the kind of this stigma that I mentioned on the not the stigma, but the mindset from the executive side sometimes where they're like, well, I'm paying for this BD person. If most of their deals or a big chunk of their deals or whatever it is, or their top deals are coming through my network, like what am I paying them for? And there's this, I think, mindset sometimes of, well, oftentimes these are the executives that built the companies. It's their network. They kind of put in the, blood, sweat, and tears, whatever, and they're trying to replicate themselves or replace themselves. Like,
Mhm,
okay, well, I'm tired. I don't want to. I can't do business development anymore. Not as much. I'm going to try to replicate myself, and I'm going to bring on a really quality BD person. And I feel like very often that mindset fails them because
mhm,
they're setting themselves up to miss these types of opportunities where and I often talk about, like, don't try to replicate. You want to scale the rainmaker that you already have.
mhm,
And
mhm,
you as the founder, you as the one of the partner group,
mm,
they're often the rainmakers.
mhm,
So scale yourself by bringing on these people and
mhm.
making the right introductions, connecting to the right people,
Yeah.
um, those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, and I think when you get to a point, once you start to hire, sales teams and BD teams, you should have a blueprint, for what that sales playbook looks like, who your ICP is, right? And what has made you valuable, and unique to your customers or clients.
Yeah.
And then they ought to be able to run that playbook and generate, their own opportunities, and get those deals to a certain point. But ultimately, it's the trust that goes back to that founder, and ultimately it goes
Yeah.
back to trusted relationships that probably exist with those deals that should be leaned on more than they probably
Yeah.
are today, right? And it gets back to the mid funnel conversation we just had, which is,
Yeah.
yes, expect those BDs to go do some of the grunt work and the trial and error to get real conversations going, and then do a relationship audit and make sure that you've crossed every T and you've dotted every I, and give yourself the best chance of winning
Yep.
that deal, especially in professional services like you mentioned.
Yep. Yeah, I think, just thinking back, a couple of days ago, somebody reached out to me on and asking a question, like, and she's a AE or business development manager. I forget the title, I'm asking like, "Hey, I've been doing cold outreach and it hasn't been working that well. Like, what do I do?" And I don't know all the details of the business. I couldn't give her too much detail, but the topic of trust came up, and I think this is you've said the word a couple of times we've talked about it. I think that's the key, which is you have two options. You either have to enable trust building on the front end through marketing and relationship building and whatnot, or it's not really an or, it's an and. You can short circuit the lack of trust by bringing in an introduction from a trusted source,
Mhm.
right? Because that, I mean, we've all seen the stats, right? Cold outreach is working worse and worse. And I think salespeople have themselves to blame for that. That's a topic for a whole separate conversation. But um,
Yeah, I mean, just
it's
getting the audience is really, again, we focus on access. Like it's that's the mindset. It's like if I'm a salesperson, I need access because if I'm a really good salesperson, I'll ask really good questions. I'll listen intently. I'll understand then how to map my solution to their challenges or problems. And I'll actually create an opportunity with someone who maybe didn't even know they had a problem we're solving before I had that first call. Right. And so
yeah,
what I needed was the audience to be able to have that conversation. They didn't show intent. Right. They didn't go on a vendor search. They didn't even know they needed us as a consulting firm or professional to help them until we had this conversation and they realized the implications of not solving the problems that they had. And so,
yeah,
what I think is so important about this is it's that trust initially that creates an audience that's willing to listen,
yep,
create new opportunities. I don't know what the stat is, but we see it all the time. It's like 95% of the buyers out there don't even know they have a problem, right? And 5% of the ones that are getting picked up, through all these intent tools. So I think that's where trust becomes so valuable.
yeah. I don't, not to nitpick. I don't know that there are people that don't know they have a problem. I just think that the problem is not big enough for them to do anything about. Like, I
Mm,
don't, at the end of the day, like, if I'm trying to think of a easy example, but it's like if I don't feel I need a CRM, if I don't believe I have a customer relationship management issue,
mhm.
it doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to convince me that I do.
You may not
Doesn't-
know that there's a version of a CRM out there that fits you perfectly though, because your idea of a CRM might
Yeah, but I have to be in the mindset, right? I have to be in the mindset that I have a customer relationship management problem. And then if somebody comes to me saying, "Hey, there's this thing that you didn't know about," I'm like, "Oh shit, all right." But if I don't think I have a problem, it's just I've got a million other things to deal with.
well, or if I'm really good as a salesperson, I know you don't think you have a problem, but you do, because I'm gonna ask you questions about your business that you are gonna discover for the
Yeah,
first time, right? And that's where, again, the audience you would have
fair.
never given some CRM vendor an opportunity to even have that conversation. And again, it's not gonna work every time, but that's
But there has
that's
to be a pain.
it has to be paid.
That's the key. There
Exactly.
has to be an existing pain. You might not know the source of the pain.
That's right.
That's
That's
true,
right.
but there has to be an existing pain.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Um, so, a couple of things I want to take maybe a step back to is we talked about culture a bit. And I think it's worth talking about that because something I'll talk to my clients about is if you're going to do this, you have to build a culture of referrals within the organization. And that really, I mean, it's the basics. Like you have to be willing to give before you can ask, and then you have to be willing to ask appropriately as well. Um, what are your thoughts on kind of the culture component of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from the perspective that we have with our customers. This is, a system that's built within their ecosystem, right? So these are all people that are connected to the business somehow. So that obviously, is the culture that they've built. Um, and I think in every one, and we always try to say, hey, there's going to be a percentage of people that don't want to do this. So if it's 15% of all of the eligible connectors that are super private, that really don't want to make introductions, that's okay. That's actually great because what that does is it excludes them from being bothered with irrelevant requests, right?
Yeah,
And there's typically a percentage that don't want to. Um, and then for the others, how do you create, again, I think sort of a cadence of of referrals becoming part of this daily go to market motion. And so what we see are teams that, you know, we call them relationship leads, right? So these are, a part of what salespeople respond to every single day. We refer to them as relationship audits, right? So it's a nomenclature that teams then begin to institutionalize as part of their overall sales process. It becomes part of the whole qualification stack. We had one customer who told us that of all the deals they lost, they had three or less connections and relationships. All the deals they won, they had seven or more. So their marketing operations team had done an analysis of win loss, and that's what they found. And it's amazing because again, it suggests as multi-threading is more important than ever. But these relationships, have a direct impact on conversion rates. And so when people start to hear that, and if they have equity in the business, that's really big. But I do think you can run contests, you can create some excitement around it, right? We saw one, customer just had the product and engineering team for one quarter who can make the most warm introductions, right, to former colleagues or people that you know. Here's our top 200, and they had some fun with it. They had, first, second, and third prize. There were other incentives. Um, they got teed up with the right content to use as part of the outreach. Like, they spoon fed it. Um, but I think, they feel like they're a part of the overall team a little bit more. I think sometimes people in other departments don't get to contribute to the top line the way that they even might want to. And so, especially if you cut them in on part of the deal and there's a tangible bonus or reward when a deal closes, that becomes pretty meaningful to people that are, looking to earn more income.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, if I break it down kind of in the steps, if you will, I think step 1 is that mindset and culture. Like, you have to set that up first before you can do anything else. Then step 2 feels like it's, well, let's bring these relationships to the forefront. I mean, I've actually done this with some of my smaller size clients, 5 million and under. And it's okay, it's a company of anywhere from 3 to 10 people usually. It's like, okay, everybody, or at least the top, the founder and maybe the director level and above. So that might be, 70% of the organization at that point, usually. Like, download all your contacts that you have, export it from LinkedIn, export it from your email, and then just rank them 1 to 5. What's the quality of your relationship? Would you be willing to make an intro to this person? Like very simple. It doesn't take that long. I mean, everybody has what, like maybe you have 1,000 connections, so you sure it takes you, I don't know, half a day, let's just say, to go through. But the value of that half a day is profound,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then all of a sudden people go, "Oh, you know that person?
That's
Well,
right.
I was just at a conference and I met so and so, and they work for that person.
That's right.
Could you introduce me?" Like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I've literally seen that happen live.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. I mean, again, that's exactly, what we're,
I mean, I know that's what the platform does and it scales it and et cetera, but I mean, I've literally had people do it manually in a spreadsheet, like you
right.
said. Um, and then the
And
next step from
it
there,
benefits them, right? Because then they're
yeah,
able to distinguish and signal who they really know and who they don't. And so you really, put control back to them, which
yeah,
is one of the key things.
yeah. And that's where, like people think, oh, sales navigator, but it's lacking. Like, you don't know. I mean, people have so many connections. Like, yeah, I'm always happy to make an introduction to people I know, but I've had people reach out like, "Hey, do you know this person?" I'm like, Look, I don't even know how the hell I'm connected with them. Like,
Yeah.
I could send them a message, I guess, but it's not going to carry any weight. They don't know me from Adam.
Right. Right.
Maybe they consume my content, so maybe it matters, but it's
Right.
not great. Um, and then the last piece of that, it feels like it's the process and the skill set of managing the relationship and also managing the ask.
Hmm.
Like asking in the right way and asking the right people at the right time. I
Hmm.
mean, I'll tell you this story. There's somebody I don't know how connected with them on LinkedIn. I've never spoken to the person. I I don't think I've ever consumed their content. I can't remember. I had no idea how I connected with them. This guy reaches out and he's owns his own firm. I don't know, maybe a firm of like 10, 20 people, something like that, because I looked him up after this happened, and reaches out to me, goes like, "Hey, I see you know so and so. Would you be willing to make an intro?" I'm like, "No, this is a former client of mine. I have a strong. I could, but the answer is no. I didn't even respond. I don't think. I'm like, this is just
Right.
stupid. Like,
Right.
who in their right minds reaches out to a random person and says, "Hey, could you make an intro to so and so? I'd love to talk to them." Like, I don't know you.
Right.
I'm not burning my social capital for you.
Right.
No, like if you, David, reached out to me and asked me, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. Like, why do you want the intro? I'd reach out to them. Hey, are you cool with this? If I introduce the two of you, here's why.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, cool. Here's the intro. No
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
But
Right.
you and I have spoken on numerous occasions and it's different.
Right.
So I think
Right.
there's a muscle and a skill set and the process that needs to be developed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just walked through kind of your process of doing a double opt-in, which is part of like a best practice, right?
Yeah.
For someone that's connecting someone, because it shows respect to the person who's, willing or
Yep.
unwilling to take that meeting. So that alone, is important. But no, I mean, what you said is, you really have to maintain that realization that relevancy and context and like a reason should be a part of every introduction request. It just should.
Yeah.
Again, there's oftentimes with our customers sort of this collective interest. Yeah, we want to help. Just let us know what deals you're working on, and so then it becomes much easier to just ask for the
Yeah.
introduction and enough context about the opportunity. But um, you don't have a big network because you abuse that network or you take for granted those relationships. You make with more deposits than you make withdrawals, right? Like that's a part of
Yeah.
building a relationship. So it's critical.
Yeah, I think you mentioned uh, context and was it timing and relevancy?
Yeah,
Were those the
relevant.
two things? Yeah, like I think of it as very similarly. I think to how I think about presenting new recommendations for clients, which is you put it in the form of a business case. Now, I'm not saying you should do a very detailed business case for every introduction you're asking for, but very basic. Like, here's why I'm asking for the recommendation. Here's why I think it's relevant to them, and um, here's depending on who you're asking for, it might even be like, here's what I can do for you in return, maybe,
Hmm.
right? If it's depending on the type of contact it is,
Yep.
but just sort of very basic and like risk reward here. Let's make this simple for
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's it. I think
you.
in reciprocity, it depends. I think if it's two people who are both salespeople and
Yeah,
their interests are to get more meetings, then it's super natural, right? To be like,
yeah,
let me know where I can help, you as well, look at my network, or I'll share my network with you. And, uh, for different, connectors, they may not
yeah,
care as much about that as they do. I think even the simple, like, hey, Mike, your introduction to Lisa led to a meeting with she and her colleague, and now we're working on a proposal with them. I'm so grateful for you doing that.
yes,
If the deal closes, I'll let you know, but can't thank you enough for going out of your way. And then if the deal closes, send them a bottle of wine, right? Or
yeah,
do something, to really close that loop, and that
yep.
will, allow you to have permission to ask again, and they'll offer actually proactively
Yeah,
the next time.
yeah. I think the two things that you mentioned. One was the double opt-in. Right. I think that's a to me. I think it's a must. I'm still surprised how many people don't do it, and the reason I'm surprised is because I was the person that didn't do it, whatever, probably a decade ago, and I got spanked for it by a CEO client of mine. He's running a startup, but he'd been around the block a few times. He's like, "Hey, look, please don't do that again." I was like, "Ugh, sorry." I was pretty early in my career, and so I've never done it since. It's always tell me why. What is it that you want? How can I introduce you best? Why do you think it's a good fit? And then if I at that point feel like I'm comfortable doing that, then I'll go to the other person. They'll do that. So that's one. Two is the feedback. I think it's so important because most of these people, like you said, they're not looking for anything back from you. Now, sure, it's like with any friendship, right? Like if all you do is take, at some point they're going, okay, this is just stupid. But it usually it's a strong relationship. It takes a while before it gets to that point. but they do want to know, like, hey, was this valuable? Like, I've had just today actually somebody, it wasn't uh, for business per se, but it was a prospective client. We haven't worked together at this point, but she reached out this morning and be like, hey, just want to let you know, thank you for introducing me to so and so. Um, like, she's great. We might actually be doing some business together. She's a very unique skill set. Really appreciate the intro. I'm like, wow, awesome. Like, I like her too. She's great. Thank you. And that's it. Like, it just make me feel good for making the intro.
Yeah.
And I try to do the same thing because I think it's often forgotten. It's like, oh, intro's made, and then you don't hear anything. You're like, well, was it good? Was it bad?
Right. Right. Did they care?
Yeah. And then as the connector too, I think the other valuable thing is follow up. I try to do this. I sometimes forget, but it's like you make the intro, and then a week or two later, maybe three, whatever, depending on the type of intro it is, follow up. Like, hey, how'd it go?
Yeah.
Because I want to know, like, was this intro worth making? If not, if you tell me no, this person kind of sucked. Okay, I'm gonna be careful about ever introducing that person again.
Right. No,
I want
absolutely.
to know that.
That's it. That's a big one. No question about it. No question about it.
Um, so anything, anything else you think worthwhile discussing again in the context of professional services,
Yeah.
silos, etc. Anything else you think we've missed that we should be touching on?
I think you'll hear it, right, which is like from the partner or executive. It's like, I want to help. I'm willing to help. Where can I help? You're not always going to get the request from the salesperson because of the reasons we've talked about, right? They
Yeah.
either are apprehensive, they feel like they can handle it. So, you know, one of the approaches, that we've taken is there's a much more of a push versus pull where
Mm,
you can identify where, you might have relationships already, right? And the strength of those relationships, and that maybe one of those big opportunities that you're working on is where you have a relationship. If I can nudge you appropriately and let you know that, give you the
yeah.
freedom to proactively offer help and have that suggested introduction rooted to the right
Yeah.
salesperson, so that it's that permission doesn't need to be granted, but you're given a much faster,
Hmm.
easier way to offer help, because you don't know where you can help. I mean, what I'll hear all the time is, hey, what are the top 10 deals you're working on right now? I'm sure I know somebody at Nike or,
Yeah.
wherever. And that's what a lot of them want, right? And so if there's a
Yep.
smarter way to achieve that, then you kind of get this going both ways, which is that
Yep.
the connectors then are offering help as much as the requesters are asking for help.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's the concept of visibility, and needs to happen from both sides. It's
Mhm.
what's in the pipeline, what's being worked on,
Yep.
right? And where we may be getting stuck, or where would we like a leg up, whatever it is. And then on the other side, it's what relationships exist, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
rank them.
And an
And
alphabetized Google sheet every month doesn't do the trick.
yep.
I'll say that. Like, it just doesn't. This is what most companies do.
Mm,
Fall short. There is not enough visibility. There's not enough accountability. The reps don't get to see it. Opportunities are
yeah.
lost left and right. So there is a more sophisticated, smarter way to do that. Um, but it requires more than a spreadsheet for sure.
Here's the funny thing though, is because I've done this manually for smaller firms that either don't have the budget for a tool, or it's too early for them, whatever it is. And a spreadsheet actually does, it doesn't do what your platform does whatsoever, but at a very basic level, it solves the visibility problem. It's really it's as simple as a VLOOKUP, right? It's what's the network? What are the deals? And you literally just do a VLOOKUP for company and go, oh, here are we have 6 contacts here. I know 3 of them strongly because I went to college with one. The other one was a coworker, and the third one was a former
Yeah.
partner of mine. Like, yeah, let's go. I'm happy. Like, hey, do you want introductions to these 3 people? Because it
Yeah.
looks like you only know one of them.
Yeah. If you're
It's
motivated
literally a simple VLOOKUP.
but believe it or not, as like most of these executives do, that doesn't even seem simple, right? Because there's work
Yeah.
required.
So someone's got to do the operational part of it and like
Right. But
bring that to them. Yeah, I don't know. Definitely don't expect the executives to do that work
well,
whatsoever. It's a
and I think that's where the opportunity lies, right? Which is, make it so that it's 2 clicks, and
yeah,
and so that's again, reducing some of the friction that exists today.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. Well, do you want to maybe again take a minute or two talk about Small World again? I'm a fan of the platform. I've recommended it to clients. It solves this problem, or at least from a technology perspective, it doesn't just solve the problem. It allows you to scale it across a much larger footprint.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, as you said, we built a platform and a Salesforce integration that helps companies do this at scale. We work with professional services firms, technology companies, from growth stage all the way up to publicly traded companies, and they're seeing much higher conversion rates, both with meeting requests as well as conversion rates on active deals in the pipeline, by institutionalizing this across their sales and marketing teams and with the connectors throughout the ecosystem of their business. And so what we like to say is we're solving the last mile. So we're helping create access to senior level decision makers in a much faster, more effective way. And we really solve the challenges of trying to do this through LinkedIn. Even if you've got Team Link, it's not the same because you remove all the ambiguity once you have it within a system that has a common language between these two constituents that creates visibility, tracking, and it becomes part of the daily go-to-market motion. So teams that are looking to not only drive higher conversion rates, but reduce CAC because we actually can activate relationships and growth throughout the assets that are already part of the business, which are your employees and people. This is, I think, a really interesting solution to consider within your RevTech stack.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, I don't not a formal endorsement per se, but I like the product, and like I said, I've recommended it to clients. So love it.
Oh, we
Um, I think that's a good place to wrap up. I haven't seen any questions come through, so if anyone does have one, pop it into the chat, please. Otherwise, oh wait, hold on. Oh, just says great conversation. Okay, not a question. So we can wrap up there. Thank you, David.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, this is fun. And for everyone else, I'm back next week. We'll be talking M&A. So if that's of interest to you as you're planning 2025, definitely recommend you tune in. So see you, everyone. All right.